Perseverance has long been important for the members of Weatherford Memorial Baptist Church. After all, a nearly century-long journey is not for the faint of heart. The journey began on a chilly Sunday morning, January 1907, as the Clopton Street Baptist Church of Richmond, Virginia, finalized a very important decision. Under the leadership of J.G. Loving, half of Clopton Street Baptist Church's members decided to branch out and form a church of their own, what would become the Weatherford Memorial Baptist Church. The namesake was inspired by the colonial-era Baptist preacher John Weatherford. A Baptist preacher for more than 70 years, Elder Weatherford was an early advocate of religious liberty and, as a result, suffered more persecution than most for his preaching. In fact, Weatherford was jailed in 1773 for over 5 months in Chesterfield for unlicensed preaching. Despite the prison bars, Weatherford continued to preach to large crowds gathered outside his cell window. He sometimes would extend his hands through the bars. This outreach proved too tempting for those who didn't understand his message. Hooligans would often slash at Weatherford's hands. Authorities then built a crude stone wall towering nearly 12 feet high, not to keep his neighboring cellmates in, rather to keep those seeking his message away from the window. Weatherford was eventually freed when Patrick Henry, an invaluable friend of oppressed Baptists, came to his defense and paid the fines levied against him. Later, Elder Weatherford tried in vain to pay Henry for his services, sending him £5 in gold, carefully wrapped in a handkerchief. But Henry returned the gold, unopened. So it was fitting, really, that the newly formed congregation of Weatherford Memorial Baptist Church had chosen this namesake. They, too, would have to persevere to continue sharing their message. Weatherford Memorial had a vision: become mission-driven and reach out to the community. In 1917, just 10 years after forming the mission, ministries had quintupled and the membership doubled. That same year, the first auditorium was dedicated. In 1925, deacons and deaconesses were introduced. A unified budget was created, and the Baptist Young People's Union Organization was formed. Between 1928 and 1932, under the pastoral leadership of V. Carney Hargroves, membership continued to increase. New Sunday school buildings were added for the children, who many hoped would continue the mission by becoming future elders of the church. For nearly 30 years, Weatherford Memorial underwent historic changes under the leadership of J. Levering Evans. Membership grew steadily and was quickly approaching 1,200 people. In the 50s, Weatherford Memorial held their first service at their new location, the corner of Hull Street and Belt Boulevard in Richmond, Virginia. By the mid-1960s, Weatherford's congregation decided to build a new sanctuary, predicting the new building would become a lighthouse for the southern part of Richmond. They hired John Stafford Efford to construct the beacon, modeling it after a neighboring historic property, Monticello, the home of Thomas Jefferson. Quite a tribute, as Jefferson was also a proponent of the country's early principles of religious freedom. In 1975, the final brick was laid, and the dream of the new sanctuary became a reality. For the next 22 years, Weatherford Memorial was dedicated to supporting missions nationally and worldwide. Missions were as far-reaching as Mexico, Costa Rica, Panama, Taiwan, Austria, Hungary, Slovakia, Czech Republic, China, France, and even Tanzania. Despite the church's strong congregational core, nearly 98 years after beginning the journey, active church membership was steadily declining. With a little over 100 members still active, the congregation voted in a new pastor with the hopes of revitalizing the church. In September 1998, Dr. Ricky Hurst became the 12th and final pastor of Weatherford Memorial Baptist Church. Dr. Hurst, who hailed from Georgia, didn't hesitate when the opportunity became available with Weatherford. He knew he would be taking on a challenge that demanded special attention.
The special attention that Weatherford needed happened to be in the area of dealing with a congregation that was slipping more and more into decline. Having been a church that was rather large and active during its heyday, especially during the golden era of the 40s and the 50s, it had declined substantially, especially by 1998. And knowing that, and also knowing the demographics of the community and seeing how the community had changed, I knew that Weatherford Memorial was going to need special attention and trying to figure out not only what it could do to reach the community, but what it was going to do as a congregation as far as growing and developing and what that meant for their future.
For 7 years, Dr. Hurst and the congregation were dedicated to his rekindling strategy, working tirelessly to revitalize and create new ministries, reaching out to the community. Their hard work and dedication kept them afloat. But in 2004, the Finance Committee reported that without a dramatic turnaround, the church would indeed run out of money within a year. Weatherford Memorial met with Glenn Akins to discuss some possible alternatives for the future. As Glenn Akins listened, he knew relocation was not the answer and that a bigger decision had to be made.
Another component of that town meeting was to begin taking the focus off of their loss about potentially closing and begin focusing on something future-oriented that would give them a hope. In other words, how could we talk about ending with hope? How do we leave a kingdom legacy as we go at this? Perhaps the critical point in that conversation came when we started thinking about how do we ensure ministry occurs here for the sake of future generations, for their grandchildren, for instance, or other people's grandchildren. And as we shifted the conversation away from their loss to a future-oriented hope of scripting, of writing a next chapter, there began to be kind of a turn in how it was being received. But I'll never forget one of their key leaders, Maynard Gwill, nearly went pale at the suggestion of closing their ministry and giving it away. That was way too radical for them to think about. So it was kind of an interesting meeting, but overall suggestions were well received, but man, it needed time to soak. And they took about 2 more months to soak and let it stew some before they were ready to make a recommendation back to the congregation, which they finally did in, I think it was May of '05, and their church council recommended to the congregation that they close their ministry effective in the fall of '05, and that the assets be transferred to St. Paul's for another shape, another chapter of ministry that grew out of this seed that fell to the ground. It was pretty awesome to be a part of the conversation.
The decision to give Weatherford Memorial away wasn't easy, but the congregation agreed that after nearly a century, this community beacon of light needed to continue to shine. With trust in God's grace, peace, and love, Weatherford Memorial Baptist Church entrusted its real estate property to a Christian nonprofit organization of like faith and order. The Weatherford Memorial Baptist Church donation to the St. Paul's Baptist Church was a historic moment for Richmond.
I have 3 things I want to share with you. I guess I could call them grace, peace, and love. But there are 3 things attached. First, allow me to present to you in a symbolic fashion the key. And along with the key, a plaque on which the key may hang, of course, with these words: commemorative key, a gift of Weatherford Memorial Baptist Church facility to St. Paul's Baptist Church, September 2005. Also, I have here in my hands the deed to this property. It is contained in this envelope.
but it is, as you know, so much more than a deed. Bless you. And I have a personal token. Key. My key. Your key. God bless you.
Senior Pastor Lance D. Watson was astounded to hear that Weatherford Memorial was giving St. Paul's such an amazing gift. Pastor Watson also appreciated the enormous responsibility St. Paul's would be carrying out to represent such a living legacy in the city.
When I first heard that there might be the possibility that a church would be interested in donating to us a facility, I treated it kind of lightly in the beginning because it sounded so out of the ordinary. It was so uncommon, so unprecedented. And so in the beginning, I didn't know whether to take it seriously or not. But as our conversations progressed between me and the executive council of Weatherford Baptist Church and the planning team who was working on the future of that church, I realized that this might be a serious possibility. And once they had made the decision and actually taken the church vote and decided to give us the entire campus, I felt both grateful and humble all at the same time. Grateful that we had been the recipients of such an unprecedented, unparalleled gift, and then humble because I understood that it required something of us from a spiritual as well as a practical standpoint. For to whom much is given, much is required.
Pastor Watson's leadership has overcome major barriers in the age of church worship. Under his leadership, St. Paul's outgrew its downtown Richmond facilities and moved to a state-of-the-art campus northwest of the city. He had successfully grown a congregation of 300 members to almost 10,000, making St. Paul's Baptist Church the largest church in Central Virginia. With his vision, leadership, and dynamic preaching style, the church created over 200 ministries and helps aid people worldwide.
Originally, I talked with a couple of pastor friends of mine, in fact, about going multi-site. Dr. Jeffrey Johnson, who pastors the Eastern Star Baptist Church in Indianapolis. And then I talked to Bishop Walter Thomas, who pastors New Psalmist Baptist Church in Baltimore. And my initial thoughts about it were that it was going to be something that I might want to try 5-10 years down the road to add a second site, because after such a long journey to get to our present facility, I was not exactly eager to get involved in another very trying and arduous expansion. But of course, after having talked to them, I became even more ambivalent as I thought about the possibility of doing this at this stage in my life and at this stage in my ministry. So I put it off and kind of put it out of my mind. When the possibility of being given a campus came about, it of course brought that back up on the front burner in terms of my thoughts and my prayers and my sentiments, and I began to wrestle with, could God be speaking in this situation? And of course, when they gave us the facility, what it did was remove all doubt, because when I called both of my colleagues back and said, well, what do you think about this? I never will forget what Bishop Walter Thomas said. He said, well, whether you were ready to do something in Southside or not, whether you thought it was a part of God's plan or not, it's apparent that God has something for you to do in Southside, and that the gift mandates that particular ministry. So what the giving of that entire campus did for me was first to cause me to dream another dream, a larger dream, a bigger dream, a more expansive dream, that could it be possible that God not only wanted to bless us here, but to bless us in multiple locations. Could it be possible that rather than just multiplying groups and ministries, God also wanted us to multiply campuses and to be closer to the places where people actually lived and worked so that they could participate not just on the weekends, but during the weekdays? And as I began to entertain all of those things, of course, I ended up writing and preaching a sermon based on the scripture where it talks about Joseph dreaming another dream. And so now I'm dreaming another dream, and it's about multiplying groups, multiplying ministries, multiplying locations, all aimed at achieving the ultimate objective, which is to go into the entire world and preach the gospel to every creature, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to observe all things that Christ has commanded, knowing that, lo, he'll be with us always, even to the end of the world.
After receiving the Weatherford Memorial Baptist Church gift, Pastor Lance Watson understood he would soon focus on not only St. Paul's North Campus, but he would shift his present and future plans to accommodate what would become the new location, St. Paul's South. Pastor Watson is sensitive to concerns that Weatherford Memorial's vision and history be honored, and is confident St. Paul's will succeed carrying out the work started by Weatherford Memorial Baptist Church.
Many years ago, long before the advent of the personal computer, before email and even television, radio itself was king. During the early 1930s, radio was of itself in its infancy. There was a young man who was dispatched from the radio station to go to Buckingham Palace on that day, because on that historic day, King George V of England was to address his people for the very first time on this new medium known as radio. The young man, as he went to Buckingham Palace, he troubleshot all the potential possibilities that could occur. And just as the king began to approach the podium, the young man noticed two broken or frayed wires in the electrical equipment. Now, I'm a son of an electrician, but I do not understand the properties of electricity. The young man stooped down in that podium that day and held one broken wire in one hand and the other broken wire in the other hand, and the current flowed through his body from that transmitter back to the radio station. And on that historic day in England in the early 1930s, the king addressed his people through the body of one willing young man. When asked afterwards why he had hazarded himself in that way, hazarding even his own life, risking electrocution, the young man said that the words of the king must go out. Friends, as we gather here together today, based upon the decision of this church this past May, people ask, why does a church give itself away? People will ask, why does a church give an endowment fund to an organization who will in turn give that money to continue Virginia Baptist work and Richmond Baptist Association work in this community and beyond? And I echo that familiar refrain, as that young man did in the years ago. Because on this day, and all days which are to come, the words of the king must go out.
I would like to express my gratitude and my thanks to Lance Watson. I truly appreciate his openness and his sensitivity to God's calling. And I so much appreciate his ministry, but I really appreciate his sensitivity to God's calling and knowing and realizing that God has been, throughout this entire process, leading Weatherford Memorial and leading St. Paul's Baptist Church into this venture. And I just want to say thank you, Lance. Thank you for your ministry. Thank you for your sensitivity to God's calling.